Ahoy, mateys! Welcome to Podcasts of the Caribbean, a podcast covering the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, from the theme parks to the movies and everything in between. My name is Justin Helmer, and I will be your host on this voyage through the Caribbean. It'd be too late to alter course now, mateys. Hello, and welcome back to Podcasts of the Caribbean. It has been a pretty good while since the last episode, and I want to say that the break wasn't really planned. There were a bunch of things that were going on in my personal life and school and all kinds of things that were going on. It ended up getting in the way of the podcast. I was also feeling a bit burnt out at the time as well, but with this break, it's gotten me pretty rejuvenated, and I'm back and ready to talk about more Pirates of the Caribbean. So thank you all for sticking with me through the break. I know a lot of people had messaged me, asked me when the podcast was coming back. So thank you all for the support. It really does mean a lot. And so today we'll be beginning our journey into the literary world of Pirates of the Caribbean. So throughout the podcast, I have referenced a bunch of books that I said we'd eventually cover. And we're finally jumping in and finally getting there. So we'll be going in timeline order. So if you couldn't tell from the title of this episode, we are starting with the iconic Young Jack Sparrow book series by Rob Kidd, and in this episode we'll be covering the first book in the series called The Coming Storm. Now before we get into the book, let's recap some recent Pirates of the Caribbean news.
I hear a rumor.
You may have also heard whisperings and rumors.
A message from someone you know.
I always listened like a thief for news of the Black Pearl.
Alright, so a lot of this news isn't really new, but since it's been a while since the last episode, I figured I'd kind of recap everything that's gone on so far. So, this was a few months back, but Jerry Bruckheimer, of course, producer of all 5 Pirates films, he has said that there are 2 Pirates films currently in development. There's the one which is the Margot Robbie spin-off movie, and there is also the movie that is essentially what he has called a reboot with a younger cast. Now, when he says reboot, I don't think he means fully like rebooting the franchise. I think he means just like bringing in new actors. But the word reboot does definitely, get people scared, and it is a little interesting. We don't know anything of what to expect from these, but Jerry did say that the script for, I think the reboot one, the script for that should be done in about a month or so, and apparently they will be sending it over to Disney very soon. So we'll see what happens when that occurs. Now, that's essentially all the movie news that we've had. Jerry keeps getting asked the same question about Pirates of the Caribbean essentially every week, every time he's out. So he just keeps saying the same thing, which, makes sense. What else is there to say? So besides movie news, there is another piece of Pirates of the Caribbean news that maybe some of you weren't expecting. If any of you play the video game Fortnite, there will be a Pirates of the Caribbean event in Fortnite in a few weeks. I think in like 10 days from when I'm recording this episode, so I think a week after this episode goes live. So they'll be getting Jack Sparrow skin, Elizabeth, Barbossa, Davy Jones, and a cursed Jack Sparrow skin, which is very, very cool. I have played a little bit of Fortnite. I'm not a big Fortnite guy. I play games that are not Fortnite. But I will be playing Fortnite for this because I'm very excited to see them in Fortnite. They look very, very cool. So if you're a Fortnite gamer, this is some cool Pirates news for you. So that'll be coming, I think, on July 19th is the day it'll be starting. So that'll be fun. Anyway, that's enough of the news. Let's get back into the rest of the episode. All right, so before we get into the book, I want to quickly talk about the books and their inception. So as part of the marketing push for the upcoming release of Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest, a book series detailing the early life of Jack Sparrow was created, and the first book, The Coming Storm, which we are talking about today, launched in June of 2006, so a month before Dead Man's Chest released. And then over the next 2 years, 12 total books would be released in the series, with one final 13th book capping it off as sort of a spin-off and an anthology book. But it's still tied into the rest of the series. Now, all 13 of these books and the subsequent series, Legends of the Brethren Court, which we'll talk about when we get there, were written by Rob Kidd. Or at least it's said that he did. What I didn't know until researching these books is that Rob Kidd does not actually exist. He's not a real person. It's actually just a pseudonym used by a bunch of different authors that wrote these books. And I never knew this until now. So some of these authors include Elizabeth Braswell, Carla Jablonski, Toy-Teeth Sutherland, and there's also a few others that have written various books, although it's unknown kind of which books were written by which author. I think some people have discerned some books, but some are currently unknown of who really wrote which book, but everything was written under the pseudonym Rob Kidd, which I never knew was a pseudonym until I researched this, and my mind was blown, let me tell you, when I figured that out. So you would think that I had read these books as a kid, being a Pirates of the Caribbean mega fan, but I actually never did until now. It was something I was always putting off for some reason, and I don't know why, because they are really good. And also finding out, as I said, that Rob Kidd is not a real person has kind of blown my mind, because I had always seen these books as a kid. I had only ever had books 2 and 3, so maybe that's why I never really read them, because I never had the first one. So like, why am I going to read the second and third one if I didn't read the first one? But the second book I have has a lot of wear on it, but the third one doesn't at all. So maybe I did read the second one, and I just completely wiped it from my memory. So yeah, I was always under the impression that Rob Kidd was a real guy, and it's kind of crazy that he is not actually a real person. But yeah, now that we've gotten all that out of the way, I think it's time we finally jump into the first book in the Young Jack Sparrow series, The Coming Storm. Alright, so each book begins and ends with a captain's log entry written by Jack Sparrow. So I'll read those in full when we get to those in every episode. So, the first book begins with this captain's log entry. So, I, Captain Jack Sparrow, being recently possessed of a ship, a crew, and a hat, do take it upon me from this day forth to faithfully and truthfully recount our adventures on the high seas and lowly streets in this captain's log. I carry out this duty in accordance with my position as captain of the good ship Barnacle, and as befits a captain, I do solemnly swear to write nothing but the truth about me, my crew, and the events that befall us, no matter how fantastical or grim. I shall begin with the tale of how I became a captain, how my crew became a crew, how we began our adventures, and most important, how I came to wear this hat. Like many stories of adventure, villainy, and thievery, it began on the island of Tortuga, in a tavern called the Faithful Bride. So, of course, from what Jack says there, the book opens in the Faithful Bride on Tortuga, which of course is a place that we know well, it's featured in the movies, and it's here that we meet our first main character in this series, Arabella Smith. Now, we have talked about her before on the podcast, in the episode where I was talking about the Pirates of the Caribbean in Disney World. There they have a small kind of Caribbean Plaza Land, which is what it's called, but there's a restaurant called Tortuga Tavern, and in that place you can actually see mentions of Arabella Smith in that restaurant. So it's very cool if you're going there. You gotta keep an eye out next time you go. You'll probably see a few mentions of Arabella. At this point, she's working as a barmaid in The Faithful Bride, and she also has auburn-colored hair, as stated in the book. So she is going about her rounds, getting ale for some of these drunken pirates, when she overhears a conversation between a few of them. So, in the book, this is the dialogue that it says. So, "There's no Spanish treasure left but inland, you daft sprog," a sailor swore. "I'm not talking about Spanish treasure," his friend, the second-rate pirate Handsome Todd, said, lowering his voice. There was a gleam in his eye, not yet dulled by drink. "I'm talking about Aztec gold, from a whole lost kingdom." Arabella paused and listened in, pretending to pick up a mug off the floor. "You're not talking about Stone-Eyed Sam and Isla Esqueletica," the sailor replied, skeptically. "Legend says Sam had the Sword of Cortes, and he cursed the whole island. Aye, I agree with only one part of that story, that it's legend, mate. A neat little city of stone and marble, just like them there Romans built, they say. Bah, rubbish! Aren't nothing like that in the Caribbean, I can tell you." "Forget the blasted kingdom and the sword. It's his gold I'm talking about," Handsome Todd spat out. "And I can tell you I know it's real. Seen it with me own eyes, I have. It changes hands often, like it's got legs all its own, but there are ways of finding it." "You got a ship then?" the first sailor says with a leery look in his eyes. "Aye, a fine little boat, perfect for slipping in and out of port unseen," Handsome Todd began. But then he noticed Arabella, who was pretending to wipe something from the floor with her apron. She looked up and gave him a weak smile. So Handsome Todd and his posse kind of suspect that Arabella and some other pirates are listening in on them, and they move to another location. So Arabella shrugs this away until the door swings open, and a young man, no older than her, as is stated in the book, walks inside. He's described as having shaggy black hair and instantly begins snooping around the faithful bride, looking for something. Arabella gets interested in what he's looking for, and she eventually sees that this guy is trying to steal this sack from behind one of the pirates. But he is unsuccessful in this, as the very tall pirate stands up out of his chair and catches the young man. So this pirate tries to throw a tankard at his head, but the young man ducks, and the tankard ends up hitting the pirate behind him. So this all begins a huge bar fight inside the faithful bride. So some of the pirates try to chase after the kid, but he eventually is able to get away with the sack he was trying to steal. And it's here that we find out the identity of this mysterious young boy. So as the dialogue in the book says, "Not a single bruise on me. Not one blasted scratch on Jack Sparrow." So we find out this boy is none other than Jack Sparrow himself. As for Jack's age at this time, it was never clearly stated in the books his exact age, although from interviews and stuff that I've read from one of the series authors, he said that Jack is in the range of 15 to 17 years old through the series. And given that it said that Jack is no older than Arabella, I would assume she is around the same age as Jack. But Jack isn't safe yet, as another pirate is almost able to take him out, but Arabella grabs Jack's collar and pulls him out of the way, and she leads him out of the faithful bride and out of danger as the fight is still going on. And Jack still has his sack, as it's stated, but Arabella is furious with him. And we'll go back into the book and read some very important dialogue. So Arabella yells at Jack and says, "How dare you start a fight in my father's tavern? Couldn't you done your pickpocketing somewhere else tonight? Someplace nicer, whose patrons wouldn't wreck the place?" She pushed him against the wall and stepped back. Jack brushed himself off, straightening the wrinkles in his coat. "Now listen here, lassie, I am not a thief. I didn't come here by choice, and I wasn't pickpocketing." Jack waved the sack in Arabella's face. "Capitan 7-foot beastie in there stole my sack here, and I was simply reclaiming my property. So if my gratitude is worthless to you, I'll just gather up my things, not say thank you for being so inhospitable, and be on my merry way, savvy?" And then Arabella says, "Do you have any idea who you've taken that sack from, whether it's yours or not?" And Jack replies, "No, and truth be told, I do not care," Jack said, wrestling free from Arabella's grip. "That was Captain Torrance, you idiot," Arabella said, slapping Jack upside the head. Jack looked blank. "The infamous and the dreaded?" "Not ringing any bells," Jack answered. "The most notorious pirate this side of Hispaniola?" Arabella tried again. "Oh, wait," Jack said with a sudden look of recognition. Then his face fell again. "Nope, sorry." And Arabella says, "Well, either way, you're as good as dead stealing from him." And then Jack says, "Look, I am not a crook. This crummy sack here and what's in it is all I have. I would have brought more, but storage space for stowaways is very limited." Then, as is typical on this bloody island, a bloody pirate stole it from me. I don't even bloody remember it happening. The bloke, he got from me from behind. But what I can tell you is that this here is my sack. Jack leapt onto an old barrel and opened the sack. "For instance," he said, digging around in the sack, then pulling out what looked like a stick of wax, "this candle here is not mine." Jack looked at the candle confused, then tossed it down. So Jack realizes this is not his sack, and he throws the sack down on the ground, and Arabella finally introduces herself to him, and she says, "Arabella, by the way. The lassie has a name, and it's Arabella." And then Jack introduces himself to her, and then Arabella says, "Look, sorry I went wild on you. It's just my father's temper is bad enough as it is. He's going to be in a frightful state now, spending the next week fixing up the place, repairing the chairs and tables that you helped destroy. There was a small thump as something Jack tossed hit Arabella square in the forehead. She caught it as it fell. It was a heavy coin. Thank you. This makes up for everything. Well, it's the only thing in here worth anything, Jack said glumly. My knife, my box, my stash of coins, it's all gone. So this is where we're first introduced to another recurring character in this book, and that is Captain Torrance. So this is the guy that Jack stole what he thought was his sack from, and as stated in the book, Torrance is around 7 feet tall, and we'll learn more about him later, so I won't give it away yet. But anyway, inside Torrance's sack, Jack finds a long scabbard with no sword inside of it. So Jack, first he tosses it to the ground, thinking it's useless. But Arabella picks it up and sees an inscription in Aztec, which neither of them can read, along with an image of Quetzalcoatl. If you're unfamiliar with who this is, Quetzalcoatl was an Aztec god of the wind, air, and learning, among other things. And pay attention here, because it's about to get very interesting. So Arabella realizes that this scabbard belonged to the legendary Sword of Cortes. And that's right, that's the Cortes, the same Cortes that is mentioned in The Curse of the Black Pearl. So, of course, this is Hernan Cortes, if you're unfamiliar, and he was a real conquistador who was responsible for a lot of terrible things. Mainly responsible for destroying the Aztec Empire and laying waste to its people. So I won't go too deep into real history here, but to sum it up, when Cortes arrived, the Aztec people, including their ruler Montezuma, believed that Cortes was Quetzalcoatl. So the Aztecs believed that Quetzalcoatl would return one day to reclaim his kingdom. And when Cortes arrived, there were many circumstances that made them believe he was actually Quetzalcoatl. So he arrived in Veracruz, which was where Quetzalcoatl had disappeared according to legend. And apparently, Cortes's appearance was also strikingly similar to their depiction of Quetzalcoatl. And the other crazy fact is that Cortes arrived in the year 1519, which happened to be in a year the Aztecs called One Reed. And I'm not going to go too deep into the Aztec calendar because this is a whole side tangent. But anyway, the year of One Reed happened to be the year that Quetzalcoatl was born and the year that he died. And also, this was the year that the Aztecs believed Quetzalcoatl would return. And it just so happened that One Reed also coincided with our modern year, 1519, which is when Cortes arrived in Veracruz. So all of those things made the Aztecs believe that Hernan Cortes was indeed Quetzalcoatl. So to sum things up quickly, Cortes eventually besieged the city of Tenochtitlan and brought down the Aztec Empire. Now, why am I giving you all a history lesson, you may ask? Well, a lot of this ties into Pirates of the Caribbean lore, and as we know from the films, Hernan Cortes was gifted with a chest of 882 gold coins that were cursed by the heathen gods to stem the slaughter he had wreaked upon the Aztecs. And this legendary Sword of Cortes will be something we learn more about later. So anyway, to return to the book, Arabella explains to Jack more about the legend of this sword. So Arabella says, "This says belonging to Hernan. This is the cursed sword that gave Cortes the power to conquer the Aztec Empire." Arabella's eyes shone with excitement. Legend has it that the sword made him unstoppable in battle, and it gave him strange powers, like convincing the Aztecs that he was a god. The Aztecs believed the god Quetzalcoatl would come back to them someday, and with this sword, Cortes convinced them that's who he was. Legend says the sword holds limited power if the one who possesses it doesn't also have its sheath. It also played a part in Cortes's downfall. The loss of the scabbard will cause kingdoms to scab over, the saying goes. She turned the scabbard over in her hands, looking at the worn leather and shining jewels, and shuddered. It's supposed to be made from the innards of Aztec sacrifices. Delightful, Jack said, taking the scabbard from her with his thumb and forefinger. But how did it get here? Stone-Eyed Sam had it last, she said, remembering the conversation she overheard in the tavern. What, the pirate captain? The Scourge of Panama? Arabella nodded. Years ago. He took the sword and sheath and used them to make himself king of an isolated island. No one knows what happened to him or his loyal subjects. Maybe the fact the sheath has turned up without the sword has something to do with his downfall. So since Jack has stolen this sword from Torrance, he wants to go and return it to him. And Arabella tells him that Jack's best chance is just to leave Tortuga immediately and just get as far away from Torrance as he can. Jack asks Arabella to come with him since she knows a lot about different legends, along with other various pirates, and her knowledge would be something useful to him. This idea appeals to Arabella as well, since her prospects of the faithful bride aren't very good. And she also tells Jack that a pirate ransacked the faithful bride a year earlier and kidnapped her mother. So she agrees to Jack's proposal and tells him that she knows where a perfect vessel is located they can use. And she ends up making him a map and tells him to meet her in Salty Cove in 3 days' time, which gives Jack enough time to lay low and for her to gather supplies. And Jack, of course, has the genius idea of trying to track down the sword to keep it out of Torrance's hands. So we then fast forward to 3 days later, where Arabella is waiting for Jack at Salty Cove. And Jack eventually turns up, and Arabella sees that he had been in a fight. His shirt is torn, and there's a cut going from his cheekbone to his mouth. And Jack tells Arabella that he had lost the map she had given him, but found his actual sack and is ready to go. But a new voice calls out, wanting to join Arabella and Jack. And this new character introduces himself as Fitzwilliam P. Dalton III, and he is another one of our main characters in this series. And according to the book, he is around the same age as Jack and Arabella, but was very tall with broad shoulders and wore what is alluded to as being very expensive clothing. So Fitzwilliam pulls out the map that Arabella had made for Jack, which Jack had written notes on, including the fact that he was looking for the Sword of Cortes. So great idea, Jack. But anyway, Arabella asks why an aristocrat like him would want to join them. And so in the book, Arabella says why, she asked, intrigued. You're obviously wealthy and don't have the need we do for treasure. A man in your position can do anything he wants. You don't have to sneak away from your family for adventure. At least not the way I do, you know. She glared at Jack, me being a lassie and all. Ah, contraire, my lady, Fitzwilliam bowed. As the eldest son of the Earl of Dalton, I am precisely bound by the same sort of family rules you are. Perhaps more so. We came from England less than a month ago, when my father decided to expand his holdings into the New World. Since then, I have been forced to do nothing but attend balls and cotillions of other English families. Oh, sounds dreadful, Jack muttered. You have no idea, Fitzwilliam said with some heat. Regardless, I am expected to choose one of the English ladies I meet and marry her within the next year. I am forbidden from entering the naval service or pursuing any career other than what my father chooses for me, which is namely continuing the family Dalton, which means chaperoned walks with stupid rich girls, dinners with my father's friends, who are 3 times my age, and acres of banana trees. Sounds dreadful, Arabella echoed Jack. I'd take drunken old sailors over bunches of bananas any day. So when I found this, it was a sign. Fitzwilliam held up the map. My escape, my destiny, my adventure. Your exit, Jack said quickly. The high seas are no place for a well-born fop like yourself. Run along now, Fitzy. Bye-bye. Oh, come on, Jack. He might be useful, Arabella whispered. He can afford supplies when we run out, and it would be handy to have another pair of strong arms aboard. You seem to be man enough for the job at hand, Jack said. Thanks, I think. It matters not, Fitzwilliam interrupted. I am coming. No, you're not, Jack said. So Fitzy eventually challenges Jack to a duel. And I'm just going to call Fitzwilliam Fitzy from now on, because 1, it's quicker to say than Fitzwilliam, and 2, I think it's funny, so we're going to go by Fitzy. So Fitzy proposes a duel to Jack. So if Jack wins, Fitzy would leave and tell no one of Jack's plans to find the sword. But if Jack loses, Fitzy will be coming with them. And Jack eventually agrees, given that Arabella had found a sword for him to use. So eventually, though, Fitzy wins this duel and is able to join the crew. So the three of them set sail on the small boat Arabella found, named the Barnacle. So this is their ship. So 3 days out into their venture, they are in a pretty bad spot. And they're almost out of water, and they have been drifting at sea with no idea where they are or where they're going. And Arabella says that Isla Escalatica was one of the smaller leeward islands, but she didn't know exactly where Stone-Eyed Sam had landed. Jack eventually feels a little bit of wind and sees a storm is on its way. And they find it unusual the storm essentially just appeared out of nowhere. But it begins to rain hard and the seas become very violent. And Jack then comes up with a great plan to help the Barnacle stay upright by cutting down the mast. So the crew questions him at first, but they see how well Jack's plan works once the mast is down. This is a certified Jack Sparrow moment where he cuts the mast down so the boat won't flip over because it isn't top heavy anymore. So they hold the wheel and bail water until the storm passes. And they survive the storm, and in the distance they eventually spot land. So Jack gives the order to pull the mast back up, they fix it, and they slowly drift toward the island in the distance. So when they make it to the island the next morning, the three of them decide to head inland to see if they can find any supplies. Fitzy tries to get Arabella to stay with the boat as she says there could be wild beasts lurking on the island. But Arabella shrugs him off, but he constantly tries to do things for her, like carrying her bags and stuff. But at one point, Jack says the line, "Oh, Belle, please let him act as your manservant if it's the only way to shut him up." But we also find out here some more information about Fitzwilliam, that his mom died when he was 9, and he hopes that she is proud of who he has grown up to be. And Arabella feels sorry for him after hearing this, since they have both lost their mothers, and apologizes to him. And then Fitzy explains a bit more about his father and his family here as well. So in the book it says, Fitzwilliam stared into the distance sadly. It was after she died that my father first started looking into expanding his holdings into the New World. It was like he wanted to cut himself off from England and his old life forever. Talk as we walk, mates. Chop chop. No time to lose here, Jack said, ignoring Fitzwilliam's story and pushing through the jungle. He married my elder sisters off immediately, Fitzwilliam continued, to the sons of people he knew who had already moved here to the New World. Some of them we had never even met. Fitzwilliam said this to Arabella, whacking a bush aside with his sword. Not since we were all children, anyway. Jack, who was in front of them, rolled his eyes at Fitzwilliam's story. Fitzwilliam paused for a moment, wrestling a small tree out of the way. Anna, my favorite sister, was abducted by pirates on the voyage over to meet her husband, and I have not seen her since. Blazes, I know that pain all too well myself. Me mum was taken by pirates too. If you're like me, you didn't really have much reason to stick around once you got here, Arabella said softly. No, not really, Fitzwilliam agreed, a hard edge to his voice. In the name of all that's blessed and blasted, Jack blurted out, can we please call the curtain on this dismal drama and focus on the matter at hand? So, Jack, Arabella, and Fitzy keep going, but they still aren't able to find any water. And there is a point here where Jack sees how Arabella and Fitzy are like completely exhausted and thirsty, and he actually gets slightly worried and puts on a fake smile, telling them they can rest in a shady clearing up ahead. But once they reach this, they're surprised to run into two boys, Tumen and Jean. And I'm not really sure, since it's a book, I don't know if it's pronounced Jean or John. Maybe if someone better about this knows, please let me know, because I would love to know if it's Jean or John, but we're going to go with Jean for now, okay? So Jean is described as having dark skin and it's curly brownish red hair with freckles and green eyes. And he is taller than Tumen, who is described as having glossy black hair, a sharp nose, and tanned skin. So Jack introduces his crew to them, and Jean tells them that they are the only survivors from a ship named the Seraph, and they were caught in the same storm as Jack and his crew. And the two of them are also in the process of building a raft to get back to their home port. So after this, a gray cat leaps up and hisses at Jack and his crew, and I love how Jack responds, "What in the Greater Antilles is that?" And Jean tells them that her name is Constance, and Jack is confused as to why they would save a cat, to which Jean replies and tells them that she is not just a cat, but she is actually his sister. And everyone, including Jack, is skeptical of this. But Jean continues and tells them that Constance was cursed by, guess who? Tia Dalma herself. And this is our first mention of Tia Dalma in this book series, and we will see more of her later on, but this is very cool to have her mentioned this early. So Arabella tries to pet Constance, but the cat scratches her hand, and Jack gets fed up and finally asks where the freshwater spring Jean had mentioned was, and Jean begins to lead them there. So the whole group follows a path into the jungle, and Arabella asks Jean if he's a little too young to serve on a ship. But Jean and Tumen, they're both younger than Jack, Fitzy, and Arabella by a few years. But Jean tells her that he and Tumen were working aboard a private merchant ship. So Fitzy and Jack are in the back of the group. And Fitzy asks Jack if he's going to tell Tumen and Jean they have a ship. And Jack reassures Fitzy that he will because they need a crew. But Fitzy is skeptical, saying they barely know anything about them. And Jack says they need them since the two boys are good at navigating. And they need a navigator on their crew, because Jack, Fitzy, and Arabella aren't good at navigating. But Fitzy still remains on guard despite all of this. But they finally reach this freshwater spring, and Jean asks what they will do now they have found water. And Jack tells them that they have a ship, the Barnacle, and it'll be ready to sail once they fix the mast. But even Jack now tries to make sure he is thinking this through, as he thinks it may be a bit early to invite them aboard. And after this is when Constance drops a human finger bone in front of Arabella. And this is the second bone that they have seen, as Tumen showed them another bone a little while earlier, before they began walking toward the spring. And Jean leads them closer to the source of these bones, further into the jungle. And Jack looks back toward the shore, and he sees the Barnacle, but he also sees a storm approaching again. "What?" he said, puzzled. The perfect sea they had sailed in on was gone. The surf was growing rough, and to the north the sky was growing cloudy again. "Not that storm again," Arabella sighed. "It's like it's following us." "That is very strange," Jean said. "It seemed to have gone past us. To the north, as it should have. I've never seen a tropical storm come from the north." A bent and gnarled beech pine shivered in the rising breeze, making creepy, whispery noises as the wind blew through its needles. "It's headed right toward us, again," Jack confirmed. He looked back at the beach, then forward into the green, tropical center of the island. "We should press on, faster. We'll be safer under the cover of the jungle." No one disagreed. So as they're walking, Arabella says, "I wish I could wear trousers." And Jean says, "You would make a very pretty pirate. But how did your friends let you aboard? Women are bad luck on ships, you know." "So are cats," Arabella shot back, shaking her fist at him, where Constance's scratches still bled a little. "Touché," Fitzwilliam said, smiling for what seemed like the first time. "Oh, you speak French too?" Jean asked. "Oui, French, German, Latin, and Greek," Fitz said proudly. "Ah, excellent, Greek," Jack said. "No doubt that will be useful when we come up against angry natives on this island." And then Tumen begins speaking in some language that no one understands, and Arabella says, "What did he say?" And Jean shrugs and says it wasn't French Creole. So we'll learn more about that later. So as they keep walking through the jungle, they start to see more overgrown stones in the path, giving them the impression that this used to be a paved road. And they also start to see more and more bones, with full skeletons littering the ground. So Arabella wonders what killed them all, since there are no marks on any of the bones. And she says, "It doesn't seem like there was a war or any sort of battle. They just seem to have died." Even Fitzy gets creeped out by this, and Constance runs off into the distance, and Jean chases after her and falls down what everyone thinks is a pit, but then they realize it was not a pit, and instead it was a valley, since they find out they're actually standing on the remains of a city wall. And as it's described in the book, below them stretched the sunken remains of an ancient city, crumbling houses, dust-covered boulevards neatly laid out in stone, wells gone dry long ago, and it was littered with hundreds upon hundreds of skeletons. So Fitzy says this place is accursed. We should not tarry here. No, wait, Jack, Arabella cried. A city neat and well designed, like the Romans built. A pirate paradise, she said excitedly. And look, she pointed out what looked like a variation of an Aztec pyramid in the dead center of the city. Then, noticing a coin by her feet, she bent to pick it up. An S and a crude hieroglyph of an eye were carved on its face. This is the mark of Captain Stone-Eyed Sam. This is his island, Jack. This is the pirate kingdom we were looking for. Jack took in the scene and smiled. You were looking for this place? Jean asked from below. We are looking for the Sword of Cortes, Jack explained. Jean and Tumen each muttered something in his own language. Constance hissed at nothing in particular. But how is this possible? Fitzwilliam asked. The island we just happened to land on after the storm just happens to be the one we were looking for? Well, that's luck for you, Jack said with a smile, and began clambering down the wall. Tumen followed. It's not luck. We're here because we were looking for it, Arabella said. The sword, or the scabbard, clearly drew us to this place. Stuff and nonsense, Fitzwilliam retorted, but he hurried down after them anyway. Jack tried to keep his and everyone else's spirits up as they explored the city, but it was difficult. Even the promise of the Sword of Cortes wasn't enough to erase the horror of the things they saw. Since they had no idea where the sword might be, they had to look everywhere. They saw the skeleton of a washerwoman still bent over a tub, the clothes inside long dry and eaten away. What was once a tavern, chillingly similar to the Faithful Bride, was populated with dead patrons, mugs of dust and bony hands. Humans weren't the only dead in the city either. There were pens of cattle, a dog right on the heels of a cat, rows of delicate bird bones on the edges of houses, and behind it all, the wind groaned, blowing grit into Jack and the crew's eyes and teeth. What could have possibly have happened here? Fitzwilliam wondered. Plague? A fire? It was a curse, Tumen muttered. The Sword of Cortes, Jack said. As soon as Stone-Eyed Sam lost the scabbard, his kingdom went to ruin. The loss of the scabbard will cause kingdoms to scab over, Arabella muttered to herself, repeating the same line she'd heard at the inn. This is just where the commoners lived, Jack said. There's nothing royal about all of this. He pointed into a shattered dining room where 4 grinning skeletons sat around a collapsed table, still waiting for their dinner. Let's get to that pyramid for a better view. So this is really interesting, and I love the very eerie ambiance of this place, and it bears many similarities to another pirate legend some of you may be familiar with. Now, I don't know if this was the inspiration for Stone-Eyed Sam City, but you may have heard of the legendary pirate colony known as Libertalia. This is something that people have debated whether it existed or not. And I think its most prominent appearance in media is in the video game Uncharted 4: Thief's End, which is an incredible game if you haven't played it. But the game makes its own lore for the location with like Henry Avery and Thomas Tew and all these people being like a place where the most famous pirates came together and made this city, but in the game it has its own lore. Definitely recommend playing it if you haven't played it. It's such a good game. But the game, as I said, makes its own lore for the location. But in real life, Libertalia was a pirate colony supposedly founded in Madagascar by Captain James Misson. Now, the legend of Libertalia emerged in the book A General History of the Pirates by Captain Charles Johnson. And this book is where we have gotten a lot of pirate history from, and a lot of it is still debated whether it is true or not. But I just wanted to bring it up because the city reminds me of Libertalia, and I think it could have been some kind of inspiration for it, but that's that. I think it's a cool little detail. So while everyone is looking around, Jack notices the storm that was on its way has now made the sky pitch black, and he immediately tells everyone they need to take cover. And Arabella points out the tall palace in the distance. So thinking this is where they're going to find the Sword of Cortes, Jack tells them to head inside, but unfortunately it's not as structurally sound as they had hoped, since there are tons of holes in the brick all around, but the inside of the palace is very grand, yet decrepit at the same time. And in the middle of the hall, there was a plaque with a depiction of Quetzalcoatl. So Tumen gets nervous here, but before they can do much else, the floor opens up, revealing a trap. and Tumen begins to slide down, but then Fitzy grabs onto him, and once Fitzy begins to slide, Jack grabs onto Fitzy, and then Jean grabs onto Jack. But it's still not enough weight, so Jean tells Arabella to rip off some of her skirt, and she ties it around a nearby column and then onto herself, and she holds onto Jean, and then they're able to pull themselves out of the spike pit, and all that's left of the floor now is just thin ledges on either end of the room. So they go through the edges of the room on these little ledges. So they eventually make it into the next area, and they see something that shocks everyone. So as it's stated in the book, in the room beyond, rows and rows of skeletons knelt, their bony faces toward the floor, and before them, seated in an enormous carved stone throne, was the grinning skeleton of Captain Stone-Eyed Sam. So we finally come face to face with the legendary Stone-Eyed Sam, but he is long dead at this point, and if you're wondering why he's called Stone-Eyed Sam, it's because he has a ball made of onyx as an eye. So Arabella says in the book, everyone was right in the middle of something. It's like they all dropped dead at once. But Jack notices something in the room. So Jack says, look, he said in despair, pointing. A rope hung in the shadows, one end leaning up to the hole in the roof, where the rain was now pouring in. The other end of the rope hung in an elaborate knot directly over Stone-Eyed Sam on his throne. And the Pirate King himself was missing something very important. His left arm, Fitzwilliam realized. He turned to Arabella. Jack had already torn his bandana off in frustration and thrown it to the ground. You said that all the legends recall the Sword of Cortes clutched in Sam's left hand. It's been ripped from his shoulder, Jean said, giving a low whistle. Probably by whoever left this rope. He bent down to examine the dust on the throne. Whoever did this came very recently and must have avoided the booby-trapped Grand Hall completely. He knew enough to come around the back way, Jack said, stamping his feet in frustration. So now everyone is pretty disappointed that the Sword of Cortes was stolen before they had arrived. And Jack also takes this opportunity to steal Stone-Eyed Sam's hat and his onyx eye, because he won't be needing them anymore. But he also finds a key around the dead man's neck. So he tells everyone there must be treasure around, which gets them all excited and moving again. But an hour later, they have found nothing. They found literally nothing. So Jack, however, has an idea, thinking something might be hidden under Stone-Eyed Sam's bed. And he and Fitzy move the bed out of the way, and they pull off the old rug off the floor, and Jack sees a small keyhole that fits with the key he had found on Stone-Eyed Sam. And Jack was right, since in the small room under the bed, there was a huge haul of treasure. So despite not finding the sword, everyone is happy given that they have all become rich beyond belief. So everyone is now draped in jewelry, and they have filled up a trunk of treasure, because only one of these trunks was structurally sound enough, because everything else had rotted out. So they all have their own ideas for what they want to use the treasure on, but Jack reminds them that they're still looking for the Sword of Cortes. And Tumen asks Jack what's so great about this sword, because it seems to bring death wherever it goes. And Jack tells them that it has great power. He tells them they can use the power to rule the seas for themselves. And this plan does get support from Arabella and Fitzy. Tumen and Jean take a moment to think, but they also eventually agree to Jack's plan. And with them all in agreement, they begin to head back to the barnacle. As they haul the treasure back to the barnacle, Jack notices the footprints in the throne room have 2 left feet. And he finds this a bit odd, but Tumen and Jean realize the footprints belong to the pirate known as Left Foot Lewis. And we will learn more about him later on. But the storm then begins to thunder overhead, and Fitzy says that they should camp out the storm in the palace for the night, at least until the storm blows over. But Jack is insistent on going, and when Fitzy turns around, he sees the 7-foot-tall menace Captain Torrance right behind them. So the crew begins to run back to the barnacle with Torrance right behind them. He's chasing them down. They reemerge into the room with the sliding floor that they were in earlier, which has now closed up again. And Arabella realizes the traps only work if you're entering. They don't work if you're exiting. So they're able to run across and out of the palace And while Torrance is still behind them, Jack is able to open up the trap again to slow Torrance down. And they make it all the way back to the barnacle, but Fitzy trips on a piece of driftwood and drops the treasure chest. So Jack runs back to try and pick up the treasure that's spilled out, but Arabella yells that Torrance is on his way. And when Torrance gets close enough, Jack sees that he is completely dry from the storm. And he also notices the storm is circling around Torrance. So wherever Torrance goes, the storm follows. And now we finally get to learn a little bit more about Captain Torrance. So let me go to this section of the book that I have marked here. So Torrance yells to Jack, "Give me back the scabbard, boy, or suffer the consequences." "What are your plans, mate? Drench me to death?" Jack asked, stepping between his friends and the pirate. Torrance growled. As he grew angrier, the winds whipped even more fiercely around him. Hail suddenly began to pelt Jack's crew. "Dock scum," Torrance shouted. "If you don't fear me, which you'd be a fool not to, you will no doubt fear the power of the cursed Davy Jones." And this is actually very funny. Jack laughs and says, "Oh yes, Davy Jones, my fine Tortsy. Davy Jones is only a legend." Torrance also laughed, but it was a brutal, sick laugh. "I've met Davy Jones," the giant growled. "In the flesh. Consider yourself blessed that you never had dealings with him who collects the souls of sailors and binds them to service before his ship. I was a guest aboard his ship. Maybe you've heard of it? The Flying Dutchman." Arabella, Jean, Jack, and Tuman all shivered at the name. "Aye, the same terrible vessel whose very timbers are cut from the bodies and souls of doomed seamen. And I would have been doomed too, but I was smart. I was able to make a deal with Jones for my freedom. Now I must find the Sword of Cortes in its scabbard and bring them to Jones within 1 year's time, or forever be bound to the Dutchman. He branded me just so I wouldn't forget." Torrance ripped open his shirt. Jack's eyes widened. On the pirate's chest, on scarred blood-red tissue, was the feathered serpent, the same mark as on the scabbard of the Sword of Cortes. This mark angered the heathen gods, for they hate Cortes and anything to do with him. Torrance continued, closing his shirt again. "They cursed me. Rain and storm wherever I go. Worse when I've grown angry. And my dear boy, right now, I'm very, very angry." So now we have learned some pretty crazy information about Torrance. And we finally have Davy Jones mentioned for the first time, which is really awesome. And I just can't get enough of the fact that Jack dismisses the claim of Davy Jones being real at first, thinking that he's only a legend, which is very funny considering what ends up happening later in his life. But we now find out that Torrance is working for Davy Jones, and Davy Jones is looking for the Sword of Cortes. And Torrance has to bring Jones the sword and the scabbard within 1 year, or he will forever be bound to the Flying Dutchman. So the storm is now so bad, and apparently the gale force winds are ripping trees out of the ground. That's how angry Torrance is at this point. But Jack has an idea, and it's something pretty crazy. So in the book, it says, "Dry as firewood in the eye of a storm, Torrance reached for his sword. The air around him still snapped and popped with an electric charge. Jack reached for his hat, which was now sopping wet, the brim filled with rain. Jack took it off and calmly tossed the rainwater at Torrance. There was a crackle and sputtering and hissing, and finally a tremendous explosion. Jack was thrown backward. Water and lightning were not a good mix, something most people wouldn't understand for quite some time. But Jack, of course, wasn't most people. Torrance screamed in agony. Then he fell to the ground, unconscious, his body smoking. What has happened to him? How could mere water have such an effect on the devil himself? Fitzwilliam demanded. Jack just smiled knowingly and mumbled quietly, "I told little Benny that trick I showed him with the kite and the key would someday prove useful. Just hope the lad remembers it as he gets older. Might do him some good, too." So we need to talk about this. So Jack mentions here that he told someone named Benny that trick, when he had shown him with the kite and the key, would someday be useful. And if it isn't ringing any bells yet, Jack is talking about Benjamin Franklin, who of course is famous for many things, along with being a founding father of the United States. But one of his most remembered discoveries was electricity. And apparently in the Pirates of the Caribbean universe, Jack discovered electricity and showed it to Ben Franklin, which is absolutely hilarious. Now, this doesn't really make much sense given that Ben Franklin performed the kite and key experiment on June 10th, 1752, which is decades after when this book would have taken place. So, just to give you a little time frame, it's speculated that Dead Men Tell No Tales, which is Pirates 5, takes place in 1751. So this is definitely not lined up at all, but it does say in the book, Jack says, I hope he remembers that when he gets older, so maybe this happened like very, very long before, and then Benjamin Franklin's like, hey, remember that pirate kid who showed me this trick? Let's do it again. So who knows, but I think it's hilarious that Ben Franklin is mentioned in here, and the fact that Jack Sparrow has met Ben Franklin, which is just hilarious, absolutely hilarious. But now that Torrance was knocked unconscious, the storm begins to disappear, and the crew sees another ship in the distance sailing away, and they presume this to be Torrance's ship, with his crew leaving him behind. And now that Torrance has no ship, Jack says he'll be trapped there for a long time. And now they have succeeded, Jack begins to give commands to his crew. So for our final text entry from the book here, Jack says, all right then, lads. You, Fitzy, haul up the mainsail. Arabella, make secure that rigging over there. Tuman, try to figure out where in the blasted Caribbean we are. Jean, you take the wheel. Where to, Jack? Jean asked, grinning. Why, to find Left Foot Lewis, of course, Jack said, putting a foot up on the rail and looking out at sea. He adjusted his hat. And oh, he added as an afterthought, from now on, please remember, it's Captain Jack Sparrow. The Barnacle sailed on, and the crew was more determined than ever to acquire the Sword of Cortes for themselves. It would bring them power and freedom. And now they knew it would also keep them safe. After all, they would be keeping it out of the most dangerous hands in the seven seas, the barnacled claws of the cursed and feared Davy Jones. And that is the end of the first book, but there is one last captain's log entry here as well. So, as it says in the book, we set sail for the closest port in Antigua to stock up on supplies, with Tuman and Jean navigating and setting our course. Those two really are a pair of excellent sailors. Meantime, we are closing in on the Sword. I can feel it. However, I am sorry to report that unfortunately I've lost my fabulous hat to a trader on the docks of Isla Puerta in a wager over the ability of sea turtles to support human beings in open water. Still, with a ship as merry as the Barnacle and a crew as fierce as mine, I can imagine no obstacle great enough to stand in our way, not even the dreaded Left Foot Lewis. Mayhap, the next entry in this captain's log will be the tale of how we finally won the Sword of Cortes. And then it is signed by Captain Jack Sparrow. So that ends the first book in the Young Jack Sparrow series. And we still have plenty more to cover and talk about, as we still have 12 more books total in this series. So I hope you'll join me next time when we cover book 2, which is called The Siren Song, which is also a very exciting book. I do like that one as well. So it'll be very cool when we get to that on the next episode. So this episode is a little bit shorter than how long the episodes have been more recently. But since we're only going through these books, and these books are only like 120 pages each, these episodes will be a bit shorter, which was kind of in my original idea when I started this podcast. I was going to keep the episodes to be around like 45 minutes to an hour, but then they kind of just ended up becoming like an hour and a half episodes. So these episodes probably will be shorter, but maybe that's better because I feel like sometimes for stuff like this, it's better to have a shorter episode because it doesn't take that long to listen to, and it doesn't take me that long to edit as well. So yeah, that's the end of The Coming Storm. Thank you for listening to this episode. I have had a very enjoyable time going through this book. If you couldn't tell, this episode was also scripted out, which was the third time I had scripted something out for a podcast episode. The other two were for the Pirates of the Caribbean Disneyland episode and for the 20th anniversary of the Curse of the Black Pearl episode. So I'm going to be scripting out the stuff for these books, given that it's either I script them out or I read them entirely, and I feel like people aren't really coming here for an audiobook. Like, you can go and buy the audiobook of this book series, or at least for the first 6 books. So, this is supposed to be like a discussion, and we're, talking about the stuff here, and it's not just an audiobook. So, hopefully you enjoyed this. I hope you will continue to come back and listen to the rest of the episodes for the rest of this series. Very, very awesome. I cannot believe I never really had read these books until now. I'm missing out. I was missing out. They are awesome. If you haven't read them for yourself, I do recommend going and picking them up. They are a bit harder to find nowadays, given that they're out of print. And as I said, you can buy audiobooks for the first 6 books, which is weird. It's only the first 6, and they come in sets of 3. So you can buy the audiobook for the first 3 books, and there's an audiobook for the second, for books 4, 5, and 6. But they didn't do it for the rest of the series, so you're out of luck after book 6 if you're looking for the audiobook. But you can still find these books for pretty cheap on like eBay and like book sites like Thrift Books and all kinds of things like that. So I definitely recommend picking them up if you're a Pirates of the Caribbean fan and reading them all the way. I did read a few sections word for word, just because I feel it's better to actually give the actual dialogue than just summarizing it. But yeah, I do recommend reading them if you are a fan of Pirates of the Caribbean. They are, a bit slimmed down for, younger readers, and the books are very short, but that was kind of the whole point, and they're still very enjoyable. Like, it's still very enjoyable. If you like Pirates of the Caribbean, you will enjoy the books. So thank you all so much for listening. I will see you on the next episode when we cover Book 2, The Siren Song. So thank you for listening, and it's good to be back. So I'll see you next time. Podcast of the Caribbean is in no way affiliated with Disney. If you want to send me an email or a question, you can send it over to podcastofthecaribbean@gmail.com. You can also follow this podcast on Instagram at Podcast of the Caribbean and over on Twitter/X at PodcastPOTC. I post fun content and trivia over there, so make sure to go check those platforms out. But as always, keep a weather eye on the horizon, and always remember, dead men tell no tales.